Hello and welcome to the newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the top stories of this evening. In her latest message to the Korean public, President Park Geun-hye vowed to reform the country's political culture, starting with the recent bribery scandal, even leaving the door open to the possibility of an independent probe. The clock is ticking as the ruling and opposition parties hustle on the final day of campaigning, hoping to secure at least 2 seats each in Wednesday's by-elections. With aftershocks continuing to rumble through Nepal, the death toll has risen to more than 4,300, with almost 8 million people believed to be affected by the natural disaster. The country's prime minister says the death toll could reach 10,000. President Park Geun-hye, who is reported to be ill from her South America trip, responded to the ongoing political wrangling over a bribery list left by businessman Sung Woan-jong. Prime Minister Lee Wan-koo was one of 8 names on the memo, which led to his resignation on Monday. Our Choi You-sun starts us off.
In a message delivered by her senior press secretary, President Park Geun-hye first talked about accepting Prime Minister Lee Wan-koo's resignation the day before.
In order to minimize the administrative vacuum, and despite having regrets, accepted the Prime Minister's resignation. I'm sorry that the latest scandal caused the public concern.
Despite calls from both rival political parties, the president did not offer the nation an apology for the bribery scandal, which involves many politicians known to be close to her. While urging the prosecution to be impartial in clarifying the allegations, President Park vowed to reform the country's political culture.
By eradicating the dishonesty, irregularities, and corruption that have been passed on for over the years, I will carry out new political reforms.
The president also left the door open for an independent probe if agreed upon by the rival parties, should the prosecution's investigation fall short of clarifying all the allegations. The president added that 2 pardons granted to Sung Woan-jong by the former Nomuhyun administration should also be investigated.
A pardon should be granted only in a special case where the country needs to save the person and when there's public consensus.
She asked the political parties to set their differences aside, agree on pending public employee pension reforms, and pass bills expected to help create jobs for the country's young people. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
The ruling and opposition parties have responded to the president's message of regret over former Prime Minister Lee Wan-koo's resignation, and it's no surprise that their reactions were polar opposites. Our Park Geun-hye tells us more.
The ruling Saenuri Party welcomed President Park Geun-hye's message, saying it was a strong reflection of the president's determination to carry out political reform and a thorough investigation into the bribery scandal. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, the party leader Kim Moo-sung said President Park's message was highly appropriate. Saenuri Party spokesperson Kim Young-woo also said the party is in full agreement with the president and will do everything it can to reinforce the rule of law and create a new political culture. However, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy offered harsh criticism, saying her message lacked sincerity. Speaking at the assembly briefing on Tuesday, the Liberal Party's spokesperson Kim Young-look blasted Park for failing to acknowledge the corruption allegations brought against some of her closest aides at the presidential office. Current Presidential Chief of Staff Lee Byung-gi and former Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun were also listed on the suicide memo left by businessman Sung Woan-jong. The Liberal Party criticized President Park for ignoring their concerns over the impartiality of current investigation and their calls for the immediate appointment of special prosecutors. They also took issue with the president's remarks on special pardons given to Sung Woan-jong by the Liberal Nomuhyun administration, calling them irrelevant to the current bribery scandal in an attempt to intervene in the upcoming by-elections. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Also for the lawmakers of both parties, it's a race against time with less than 24 hours to go to the by-elections in 4 districts. Our Ji Myung-kyung reports on how Korea's rival parties spent their final day trying to win over more voters.
The ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy started the day in Incheon's Gangwabi district and finished the day on the streets of Seongnam in Gyeonggi-do province and Seoul's Gwanak-bi district.
I've been asking voters for support, promising that our governing party will bring about change in the 4 districts where development is lagging. I believe we will have good results in the race.
Meanwhile, the Liberal opposition MPAD urged voters to consider the incumbent government's record, especially the recent bribery scandal involving President Park's aides and ruling party lawmakers when they head to the ballots.
President Park Geun-hye's administration should be judged through voting. This is a way to revive the economy, safeguard people's money, root out corruption, and achieve political reform.
Competition is especially fierce in the Gwanak-bi district, which has long been regarded as the opposition's home turf. Former MPAD senior advisor Chung Dong-young is currently running as an independent, which may split the Liberal vote and give the ruling Conservative Party a backdoor chance. Both parties hope to secure at least 2 seats in Wednesday's by-elections as they mobilize their members to cover every last inch of the constituencies. The National Election Commission expects the results to start filtering through from 10 p.m. Korea time on Wednesday. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories, the captain of the Seoul ferry will serve his life in prison after an appeals court upheld a murder charge against him. The Gwangju High Court overturned a trial court's lesser conviction for negligence against Lee Jun-suk, who was sentenced to 36 years in prison last year. Lee and 14 other crew members escaped the listing ferry, leaving more than 300 passengers on board last April. The court reduced sentences for the rest of the crew from 5 to 30 years to between 18 months and 12 years. They asked for leniency on their original sentences of abandoning ship and violating ship safety protocols, saying they were not properly trained to evacuate passengers. Aid efforts have been ramped up in Nepal as the country tries its best to recover from last weekend's massive earthquake. The confirmed death toll soared past 4,300 with at least 8,000 injured. Even more alarming, the country's prime minister said the figure could get up to 10,000. Nepal's army and international aid organizations have been mobilized to help with rescue and aid efforts there.
Our priority is to deliver tents, water, instant noodles, electricity generators, and necessities. Following on from this, we will continuously coordinate the flights to deliver the second round of aid.
And the United Nations says 1.4 million people require food aid. 8 million people, more than a quarter of Nepal's population, have been affected by the deadly earthquake. For the first time in 18 years, the United States and Japan have signed a new defense guideline. While it enhances Japan's international peacekeeping capabilities, some Korean watchers are worried that it could also increase regional tensions. Our Na Yeon-kyung reports.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the new agreement is a historic transition in the defense relationship between the U.S. and Japan. Speaking at a joint press conference in New York on Monday, Kerry also had a clear message on territorial disputes between China and Japan in the South China Sea.
Our treaty commitments to Japan's security remains ironclad and covers all territories under Japan's administration, including the Senkaku Islands.
Watchers say Monday's agreement will enhance U.S.-Japan cooperation in dealing with territorial disputes in the region, but the shift has also elicited some concern in South Korea. The new guideline expands Japan's defense cooperation from 3 to 5 areas, allowing Japan to exercise its right to collective self-defense and help third countries under attack. Washington and Tokyo stressed this will better deter North Korea's ballistic missile threats, but some skeptics in South Korea argue that the change could strain the country's alliance with America. If, hypothetically, Korea and Japan were to engage in military conflict over Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island, under the new guideline, they say the U.S. would be supporting Japan. However, unnamed Korean government sources said Tuesday that this situation is unrealistic because Korea has clear sovereignty over the islets. The sources believe the new provision stipulating that Japan must respect a third country's sovereignty when exercising collective self-defense was made with South Korea in mind. Na Yeon-kyung, Arirang News.
And Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe passed up the chance to help heal the wounds inflicted by Japan during wartime. On Monday, Abe chose to offer no clear apology for his country's sexual enslavement of tens of thousands of Korean and Asian women during World War II. Our Kim Yeon-bin has more.
Given his track record on the issue, it didn't come as a major surprise that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe maintained his vague stance on history during a lecture at Harvard University on Monday. Addressing the audience, Abe said he had feelings of remorse for the victims of wartime sexual slavery, but worded it in a way that didn't identify Japan as the perpetrator.
With regard to the comfort women issue, my heart aches when I think about the people who were victimized by human trafficking and who were subject to immeasurable pain and suffering beyond description. On this score, my feeling is no different from my predecessor prime ministers.
Watchers say Abe's remarks was carefully calculated so as not to deviate from his administration's existing position of not directly acknowledging Japan's responsibility for its wartime atrocities. Outside the auditorium, dozens of students and other protesters, including Lee Yong-soo, one of the surviving sexual slavery victims, held a rally, urging Abe to apologize for Japan's past wrongdoings. Historians say tens of thousands of women from Korea and other Asian countries were taken by the Japanese military to serve troops before and during World War II. Japan's lack of genuine apology for its treatment of the women has seen relations between Seoul and Tokyo hit fresh lows in recent years. Abe will become the first Japanese leader to give a speech to a joint session of U.S. Congress on Wednesday. But many critics say it was a mistake bestowing Abe the honor because of his distorted views on Japan's wartime atrocities. To many observers, the Japanese Prime Minister's lack of remorse for wartime sexual slavery during his speech on Monday is a clear indication Abe will offer no clear or genuine apology for a country's past wrongdoings during his highly anticipated speech to U.S. Congress. Kim Yeon-bin, Arirang News.
And while the Japanese Prime Minister is in Washington, a former senior U.S. official spoke to South Korean reporters about his take on the ongoing historical dispute between the two neighbors. Our Hwang Sung-hee has this report.
Human trafficking. That's how Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has chosen to refer to Tokyo's sexual enslavement of some 200,000 women during World War II. He used the phrase for the first time in a Washington Post interview last month, but did not mention that the Japanese government was behind the trafficking, stirring up anger in Korea. It came up again in Abe's first public speech in Washington at Harvard Kennedy School on Monday. But former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State James Steinberg said Tuesday that less emphasis should be put on the exact words.
We should focus less on trying to parse the nuances of language and focus more on the question about whether there is a kind of reconciliation and a coming to terms with the concerns about the past that allow us to move forward, rather than getting to a lexicographer's dispute about what the right translation of the words are.
However, Abe's choice of words has once again raised serious doubt about his sincerity. But the former U.S. diplomat said the two neighbors have more commonalities than differences. While the two sides seem unable to find any shared ground, Steinberg said Washington should not pressure either of its allies.
It wouldn't help the problem. When people do things under coercion or pressure, they're always looking for ways to get away from it because they didn't want to do it. And this understanding that needs to take place between Japan and South Korea has to come out of a genuine desire on both sides to try to see if you can find common ground.
Still, Mr. Steinberg said that he will be watching Prime Minister Abe's next two public speeches in Washington closely, adding that a commitment for a sincere resolution will lead to a very positive outcome. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Moving over to other stories, the Korean economy has received some positive feedback from overseas, and the second quarter will be crucial in determining whether it's recovering. That's according to a statement made Tuesday by Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol. He said there are subtle but positive signs of recovery in the housing and stock markets, and that foreign investment continues to flow into Seoul, with Moody's upgrading its outlook on Korea from stable to positive earlier this month. But the central bank chief said external factors like the weakening Japanese yen and slowing growth in China may harm Korea's export growth. He stressed that macroeconomic policies and structural reform must come together to secure consistent growth momentum. The Korean won hit a 7-year high against the Japanese yen, causing concern for Korean exporters competing with their Japanese counterparts in the global market. Shortly after the market opened on Tuesday, the exchange plunged below the 900 won per 100 yen mark for the first time in over 7 years, trading at 897 won per 100 yen. Traders say Fitch's downgrade of Japan's credit rating on Monday may have further weakened the Japanese currency, while the Korean won appreciated on the back of foreign investors' bullish buying of Korean stocks. The Korean and Japanese currencies are not traded directly on Seoul's FX market, with their rates calculated relatively against the US dollar. And we've come to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for staying with us. We'll be back with more at 10 p.m. Korea time.